Why was she walking into that room as if every eye knew her name, when in truth, most of them did? Her boots tapped against the cold concrete floor, a rhythm, a beat, each step like a muted drum echoing into the silence. She felt the weight of the air shift as she entered. Conversations dimmed, soldiers straightened. A few frowned as if her presence was unexpected. But no one greeted her. Not yet. She paused at the threshold, scanning faces. The briefing table stretched long, its surface littered with maps, black folders, coffee mugs abandoned halfway. Men and women leaned forward, listening to the colonel at the head of the table. Tactical screens glowed behind him, casting shifting light over steel-gray walls. She took another step, then another. Her footsteps did not falter. Her name was Elena Marlowe. To most of them she was a rumor. To a few she was a burden. And to one man in that room, the colonel, she was the final card no one else had been willing to play. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The colonel stopped mid-sentence. His gaze flicked toward her. For a moment, silence claimed the room. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Then his voice returned, low, steady. "Gentlemen and ladies," he made a point of the word. "This is Operative Marlowe. You may not recognize her uniform. You don't need to. What you need to know is this: she's coming with you." A murmur rippled across the table. Disbelief, skepticism. Elena didn't flinch. She had been here before, in different rooms, under different lights. Always the outsider. Always the one people didn't want at their table until they realized, too late, that they needed her more than anyone. One man, tall and broad-shouldered with the posture of a career soldier, leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened as he looked at her. "With respect, sir, we don't need civilians on this op." Elena's chest rose, but she kept her silence. The colonel's tone hardened. "She's not a civilian." A pause. "She's been where most of you have not." And then he left it there, as if daring them to ask more. Elena's eyes swept across the room. She didn't look away from the skepticism, the doubt, the sideways glances that measured her and found her lacking. She had grown used to that weight pressing against her. What mattered wasn't their opinion. It was what would happen in 48 hours when the mission began. Still, part of her burned. She remembered the long months of training, the nights alone, the sound of her father's voice in memory. "Don't fight to be seen, Elena. Fight to be needed. The rest will follow." And yet, how many times had she been ignored, her warnings drowned out by louder voices? The colonel dismissed the team after a few clipped sentences. They filed out, some brushing past her without acknowledgement. The tall soldier, the one who had objected, paused near her. His eyes narrowed, his lips pressed tight. Then he shook his head, muttering something under his breath. It didn't matter. Elena walked to the far end of the room alone. She picked up one of the maps left behind. Her fingers traced the red line drawn across a cluster of nameless mountains. Coordinates, extraction points, risk factors. She already knew more about this terrain than any of them suspected, because she had been there once before. The map blurred in her vision as the memory rose, dust in her lungs, heat pressing down, gunfire snapping from unseen ridges. A voice in her earpiece screaming for backup that never came, and the silence afterward. She blinked hard, not here, not now. A sound pulled her back. The colonel stood at the door, waiting. "You don't need to convince them," he said quietly. "Just do what you do, that'll be enough." Elena gave a slow nod. But inside she wasn't sure. That night the base was alive with motion. The low growl of engines, the shuffle of boots on gravel, the faint metallic clatter of weapons checked and rechecked. Elena walked alone past rows of barracks, her shadow stretching long beneath the floodlights. She should have felt nervous. Instead, what she felt was something harder to name, a knot of determination wrapped around a core of fear. She had lived with both for so long they almost felt like the same thing. A voice stopped her. "Hey." She turned. A younger soldier leaned against a wall, cigarette glowing between his fingers. His face was too boyish for the hardened set of his jaw. He looked at her not with contempt but with curiosity. "You really coming with us?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "They say you don't miss, is that true?" Elena's gaze met his. She didn't answer. He gave a short laugh, exhaling smoke into the night. "Figures. No one ever answers that one straight." He hesitated, then added, quieter, "Just don't let me be the one who proves the rumor wrong." For a moment, Elena saw the boy behind the uniform, the tremor in his hand as he brought the cigarette back to his lips. The way he looked past her, toward the darkness beyond the wire, as if trying to picture the things waiting there. She almost told him something, anything, to calm the fear, but her throat closed. Words had never been her weapon. Silence had. She left him standing there, alone with his smoke. Her footsteps carried her farther into the night. Drumbeats, faint, steady, echoing against the walls of memory. Because the truth was simple and heavy. She hadn't come back here for their mission. She hadn't said yes for the colonel. She was here for one reason, one face, one unfinished chapter that still clawed at her when she closed her eyes. But she couldn't tell them that. Not yet. Inside her quarters, the silence was unbearable. She sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at her weapon laid out before her. The scope gleamed under the dim light. She ran her hands across it, fingers tracing the familiar grooves. The cold metal steadied her. But it also reminded her of the weight she carried. Because every shot she had taken lived somewhere inside her, and not everyone had been clean. Not everyone had been merciful. A face flashed, a voice, the sudden final silence. She closed her eyes, gripping the barrel until her knuckles whitened. "Don't think, just breathe." Her father's words again. He had taught her before the uniform, before the missions, before the long nights. A father who had worn his own scars and carried his own regrets. She opened her eyes, breathed, let the silence fill her again. And still the knot inside her held. Tomorrow they would fly out, into mountains where shadows moved faster than light, where one mistake could mean nothing left to bring home. Elena lay back, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the bass faded into the background. Somewhere beyond the walls, boots struck against concrete. A rhythm, a beat. Her own footsteps, echoing forward in time. She didn't know if they would carry her to victory, or to ruin. But she knew this. When history's reel turned again, and the world forgot the names of the faceless soldiers who had walked into the dark, her footsteps would still be there. Drumbeats. And someone, someday, would remember. The engines roared long before dawn. Elena stood on the tarmac, the night air sharp against her face. The transport plane crouched before them, its ramp yawning open, floodlights painting the steel skin in ghostly silver. Soldiers moved like shadows around her, loading crates, checking straps, shouting over the noise. She watched without speaking. The team clustered together at the base of the ramp. Some laughed too loudly, nerves leaking through in crooked smiles. Others stayed stone-faced, eyes locked on the ground. No one came near her, not yet. The tall soldier, the one who had objected in the briefing, caught her glance as he slung his rifle across his chest. He gave no nod, no acknowledgement, just turned back to his men. She had expected nothing else. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her pack, a quiet breath, a step forward. Her boots hit the ramp, metal echoing, drumbeats again. Inside, the smell of oil and steel hung heavy. She settled into a corner seat, strapping in as the engines climbed to a deafening pitch. Across from her, the young soldier she'd seen smoking last night kept stealing glances at her, but he said nothing. His hands were clenched so tight in his lap the veins stood out. The colonel didn't fly with them. That absence pressed heavier than the weight of her pack. Out here there would be no higher voice, only them. And her. The ramp closed. Darkness swallowed the interior, broken only by dim red lights running along the ceiling. A hollow space, a box hurtling into sky. The plane lurched, wheels tearing off the ground. Bodies pressed into seats, some heads bowing instinctively as though in prayer. Elena kept her eyes open, watching, listening. She felt every vibration through the floor, every groan of metal against wind. She had flown enough to know what each sound meant, but tonight they carried a different weight. Because she remembered another flight. Dusty light spilling through cracks, a pilot's voice ragged in her earpiece, the sudden, unnatural silence of an engine failing, then the ground rising too fast. Her throat tightened, she forced the memory back. This wasn't that flight, these weren't those men, but the echoes lived inside her. She turned her head, staring at the soldiers across from her. A dozen lives, each carrying their own fear, their own secret reason for being here. She wondered if anyone ever truly understood what they carried into war besides themselves. The young soldier caught her gaze again. He mouthed a single word, scared. Elena's face softened almost imperceptibly. She gave the smallest nod, then looked away. The plane thundered on. They landed hours later, mountains swallowing the horizon in jagged silhouettes. The cold bit deeper here, crawling through seams of fabric. The air smelled of rock, old earth, and the faint trace of wood smoke that meant someone, somewhere, lived close enough to watch them if they chose. The ramp lowered. Soldiers spilled out, boots crunching on gravel. Voices cut through the night, orders, directions, names repeated to anchor them against the vast silence. Elena stepped off last. The ground felt different, heavy, like memory waiting beneath each stone. She knew these mountains, not well, but enough. She remembered the path she had taken once before, under fire, lungs burning, carrying a weight heavier than her own body. She remembered the voice she had lost here, somewhere in these ridges. But she said nothing. The team set up a temporary perimeter, checked gear, adjusted packs. The tall soldier barked commands, his voice carrying authority he didn't bother to soften. The others responded with speed born of habit. When he noticed Elena standing apart, his jaw tightened. "You stick close," he said flatly. "You don't move without my say." She met his eyes, calm, understood. But both knew she didn't need his permission. They moved out under moonlight. Shadows stretched across the ground, warping with each step. The mountains loomed taller, swallowing them whole. Their path wound narrow between rock faces, then widened into valleys where silence felt unnatural. Every sound mattered here. The crunch of gravel, the hiss of wind across stone, the faint click of a safety check too loud in the quiet. Elena walked in the middle of the line, not leading, not trailing, listening, watching. She felt their glances, the way they checked her position as if measuring how long she would last. She let them think what they wanted. Inside, her chest tightened, not from the climb, from the memory that lurked with every step. Because somewhere in these mountains, under a sky not unlike this one, she had lost her partner. His voice still lived in her ears, his laugh, his final silence. She hadn't come back here for their mission. She had come for him, for what was left unfinished. But no one could know that. Not yet. Hours bled into each other, the march stretched, packs dug into shoulders, breath fogged in the cold. At last the tall soldier raised a fist. The line froze, he signaled low, then crouched near a ridge. The team followed, weapons unslung, eyes scanning. Elena dropped into the dirt with them, her rifle already balanced, scope sliding into place. The metal was cold against her cheek. Through the glass the world sharpened, shadows on the ridge, a flicker of movement near the rocks, figures distant but deliberate. Not friendlies. Her breath slowed, the scope rose, steadied. One flick of her finger and the world would change. But the tall soldier leaned close. Not yet. His hand pressed against her barrel, easing it down. His eyes never left the ridge. She said nothing, but her pulse quickened, because she saw what he hadn't. A second group, fanning wide, moving too carefully. They weren't patrolling, they were waiting. Her throat tightened, the words pressed against her lips. It's a trap. But she hesitated, because last time she had spoken, she had warned, and no one listened. The memory burned, voices ignoring her, command brushing her aside, until the firestorm fell and nothing could be undone. Her hand trembled against the rifle. She could speak now, or stay silent. The team shifted in the dirt, waiting. The night stretched thin, fragile. Her breath caught, she parted her lips. But then, a sudden crack split the air, a shot from the ridge. Dirt kicked up inches from a soldier's boot. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire, bodies diving for cover. Elena's scope snapped back into place. Her finger found the trigger. Breath in, hold. One squeeze, a figure dropped. Another shot, another body fell. Her rifle spoke in thunder and silence. One by one, shadows on the ridge shattered. But the wide group, the ones she had seen, were already moving, fast, closing. She swung the scope, took one, then another, but the others kept coming. Voices roared around her. Orders, curses, the clatter of return fire. She stayed calm, each shot a drumbeat, each pull of the trigger a step forward in memory's endless reel. Until at last the ridge fell silent, smoke hung in the air. The wide group scattered, retreating into dark. Elena lowered her rifle. The soldiers panted around her, sweat shining in moonlight. Some checked wounds, others reloaded with shaking hands. The tall soldier stared at her, for the first time not with disdain, but with something closer to respect. "You saw them," he said quietly. Elena's face was still. "Yes." "Why didn't you say?" Her throat tightened. She could have told him the truth, about the last time, about the weight of being ignored until voices vanished into dust. But the words stayed locked inside. She just looked back through the scope again, into the shadows. Because somewhere out there in these mountains, memory still waited. And she would not leave without facing it. That night they camped in silence. The fire burned low, casting faces in amber glow. Soldiers sat in small circles, their voices subdued, their laughter gone. Elena sat apart, cleaning her rifle with steady hands, each motion precise, familiar. The young soldier approached. His voice trembled slightly. "You saved us back there." She didn't answer. He sat down anyway, gaze on the fire. After a long silence, he whispered, "First time I've seen someone drop a man like that, like he was never there." His shoulders hunched as if ashamed. "I don't know if I can do it. When it's my turn, what if I freeze?" Elena paused. Her eyes lingered on him. He couldn't have been more than 21, barely a man. She wanted to tell him he would find his strength. That courage wasn't loud. It was silent, hidden until the moment it was needed. But her voice caught. Words refused her. Instead, she set down her rifle, pulled a small cloth from her kit, and handed it to him. A gesture, nothing more. But his eyes widened, as if she had given him something more valuable than reassurance. He clutched the cloth tight, and Elena turned back to her weapon. Her silence spoke louder than words. And tomorrow, when their footsteps carried them deeper into these mountains, they would echo louder still. Drumbeats. Against stone, against memory. Toward something she could not yet name. What happens when silence begins to speak louder than orders? The mountains answered with nothing. Just wind curling through narrow passes, carrying whispers that sounded too much like voices when you were tired enough to believe them. Elena walked in the middle of the line again, boots crunching over loose stone. The night before had left its mark, shadows in the soldiers' eyes, a stiffness in their shoulders as if bracing for the next strike. No one laughed now. No one questioned the cold silence between steps. But their glances toward her had changed. She felt it. the weight of eyes checking her movements not with doubt but with something else, something unspoken. Respect was too big a word. Maybe survival was closer. They had seen her work. They had heard the drumbeat of her rifle when it mattered. The tall soldier, the one who had tried to push her aside, hadn't spoken to her since. But once, when the line faltered at a fork in the path, he caught her gaze. His hand lifted, signaling left. A command. But the smallest pause lingered in his eyes as if inviting her to disagree. She didn't, not yet. The path grew steeper. Breath fogged heavier in the cold. The young soldier stumbled once, knees scraping against rock. Elena's hand shot out before he fell, steadying him with a grip firm but wordless. He looked up at her, shame flickering in his face. She only nodded once, then moved on. Because that was the truth of it, words had always betrayed her. Silence never had. By midday, clouds gathered low. The mountains vanished into gray mist, the world shrinking to a narrow stretch of stone beneath their feet. The air tasted metallic, sharp with the promise of storm. They halted beneath an overhang, pulling gear close, scanning the ridges that blurred into shadow. The tall soldier knelt by the map, muttering with another man. Elena crouched a few feet away, her rifle resting across her lap. She let her eyes wander past them, into the fog where shapes twisted and dissolved. She hated fog, because once before it had hidden too much. She remembered the night, thicker mist than this, gunfire muffled into something almost soft. She remembered calling out, her voice tight with urgency. "They're moving. They're closer than you think." No one had listened. The memory burned. She blinked hard, pulling her focus back. The fog here was only fog, not memory, not ghosts. Still, she kept her rifle close. The young soldier edged near her. His voice was low. "Is it true?" She glanced at him. His eyes searched her face, almost pleading. "They say you lost someone out here last time." Her chest tightened. She looked away, jaw stiff. He waited, then lowered his voice further, so soft it nearly vanished under the wind. "I lost my brother last year. Different place. Different war. Doesn't matter. It feels the same, though, like the ground remembers." Elena's throat ached. She wanted to tell him she understood. That yes, the ground remembered, and so did the air, and so did every stone you stepped on after. But her voice refused. Instead, she reached into her pack, pulled out a small strip of cloth. Frayed, faded. She pressed it into his hand. He frowned, confused. "It was my brother's scarf," he said quietly. "I carry it with me." She shook her head once. Not hers, his to keep. His lips parted. His eyes softened. Then he tucked the cloth into his chest pocket as if it had always been his. She turned away. The fog thickened. The storm above rumbled low. And for the first time since they landed, she felt something crack through the silence. Not fear, not regret, something like hope, fragile, barely there. But enough. The storm hit fast. Rain knifed through the air, stinging skin, soaking uniforms until they clung heavy. The mountains turned treacherous, stone slick, every step a risk. The team pressed forward, bent against the wind, voices lost under thunder. Elena's rifle grew heavy on her shoulder, rain running down the scope. She wiped it clean, again and again, knowing one blurred moment could mean disaster. Lightning tore the sky open. For a heartbeat, the ridges glowed stark white, and in that flash she saw them, figures moving against the slope above. Her body stiffened, her mouth opened, but the storm swallowed her words. She broke formation, dropping to one knee, rifle snapping into position. The tall soldier spun toward her, anger flashing in his face. "What the hell are you?" The crack of her shot drowned him. A figure toppled from the ridge, tumbling into darkness. Another flash of lightning, more shadows. Her finger pulled again. Another body dropped. Now the others saw. Shouts erupted. Weapons swung upward. Fire lit the storm, bullets streaking through rain. The mountains answered with thunder not their own. Figures poured down from the ridge. Ambush. The young soldier pressed himself against rock, eyes wide. The tall soldier barked orders, voice ragged against the storm. But Elena didn't hear them. Her world narrowed to the scope, breath steady, finger sure, each shot a drumbeat, each target falling into silence. She felt the storm inside her now, pulsing with memory, because this was how it had begun last time. The ridge, the storm, the figures moving too fast. And the voice she could not save. Her chest clenched. She fired again, rage and grief tightening every muscle. The past clawed at her even as the present demanded her focus. One shot, two, three. The ridge cleared, the storm thinned, the silence returned. And Elena lowered her rifle, rain streaming down her face. She couldn't tell if it was water or the tears she refused to let fall. When the shooting stopped, they gathered under the overhang again, breathless, soaked, alive. The tall soldier paced, jaw tight. He stopped in front of Elena, eyes burning. "You saw them first, again." She met his gaze, unblinking. His chest heaved. For a moment, he looked as if he might say something sharp, something meant to put her back in her place. Instead, his shoulders dropped, his voice softened. "You saved us again." The words hung heavy. Soldiers nearby stilled, glancing at her, then at him. Respect wasn't spoken here. It lived in silence, and yet in that moment she felt it shift. She gave no answer, only nodded once. The young soldier sat near the fire, scarf still pressed against his chest. He caught her eye. His lips moved around one word: "Thanks." She looked away, because deep inside, beneath the victory, the storm still raged. She hadn't come here to save them. She hadn't come here for their respect. She had come because memory had unfinished business. And tonight, as the fire sputtered and the storm drifted past, she could almost hear his voice again, soft, ragged, calling her name through static. "Elena." She closed her eyes. Tomorrow they would walk deeper into the mountains, and every step would echo louder. Drumbeats. Through stone, through silence, through history's endless reel. Why did the old woman stop her in the market that day? The question stayed with Claire for weeks, though she tried to bury it. The woman's hands were rough, scarred like bark, her eyes milky with age. She had grabbed Claire's wrist gently, almost apologetically, but with a strength that surprised her. "Your footsteps," the woman whispered. "They sound like a drum. Someone is listening." Claire froze, unsure whether the woman was delusional or if she had somehow seen through the layers of anonymity she carried like armor. Before she could ask, the woman released her and disappeared into the crowd. That night Claire lay awake, her mind replaying the moment. She had walked carefully, deliberately, but still she was noticed. And not just for being a foreigner in a tense city, but for something deeper. The rhythm she thought she had hidden was still echoing. Silence, then memory. She thought of her mother again, a voice telling her as a girl, "When you walk into a room, don't let your steps sound afraid, even the floorboards listen." It was advice meant for ordinary life, job interviews, public speaking, facing classrooms. But Claire had carried it into the field. She walked steady, never rushed, never timid. But now she wondered, had she carried it too well? Had she marked herself in ways she couldn't erase? She rolled onto her side, eyes burning from sleeplessness. Outside, gunfire echoed faintly in the hills. Somewhere, someone else's daughter was dying. And still, she couldn't shake the image of that old woman's cloudy eyes. The mission brief came 2 days later. A high-value courier was moving through the northern pass, documents, encrypted drives, whispers of something larger. Claire's role was clear. Insert at night, position herself on the ridge, and provide overwatch for the small ground unit tasked with intercepting. It was straightforward on paper. In reality, nothing was. She arrived at the forward base hours before dusk. Dusty tents, huddled soldiers, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with diesel. She kept her head down, helmet low, rifle case in hand. Most didn't look at her twice anymore, but a few always did, not with hostility, more with curiosity. One young private, barely 20, approached her as she prepped her rifle under the fatting sun. He tried to be casual, leaning against a stack of crates. "Ma'am, Sergeant Claire, right?" She didn't answer, just checked the scope alignment. He cleared his throat. Do you ever get nervous, like before?" The question was raw, honest. He wasn't posturing. His hands shook slightly, tucked into his pockets. She glanced at him, just long enough to meet his eyes. They reminded her of her brother, before deployment, before everything changed. "Yes," she said simply, "every time." The private blinked, surprised. "Really? But you're. Claire let the silence hang. She tightened the adjustment knob on her rifle, then finally spoke. "If you stop being nervous, you stop being careful. That's when you die." The boy swallowed, nodding slowly. A weight in his chest eased, she could see it. She had given him something real, not a speech, not a lie, just truth. When night fell, the air grew thin and sharp. Claire climbed the ridge alone, boots crunching over loose rock. Each step echoed in her mind like the old woman's warning. She settled into position, belly to the earth, rifle angled downslope. The valley stretched wide, black and endless, broken only by faint lanterns and the pale spill of moonlight. Her earpiece crackled. The ground team was in motion. She steadied her breath, eye pressed to the scope. A bead of sweat ran down her temple. Then movement, a figure on horseback in the distance, slow but steady. Another, then two more, the courier's escort. Claire's finger hovered near the trigger guard. Her chest tightened. Every muscle screamed to act, but she held. Timing was everything. The convoy moved deeper into the valley. Below, the ground team shifted, shadows within shadows. Claire whispered coordinates into the mic, calm and clipped. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced like thunder in her ears. Then a sudden crack, not hers, an ambush. Gunfire erupted from the ridge opposite her. Muzzle flashes lit the dark like fireflies. The ground team dove for cover, shouting into comms. The convoy scattered, horses screaming, dust clouding the valley. Claire swung her scope, scanning fast. 6 figures on the far ridge, well-armed, prepared. Her finger tightened, she exhaled. One squeeze, the first hostile dropped. Another second, another shot, the second fell. But then something strange. One of the hostiles wasn't aiming at the ground team. He was staring straight across, directly at her. Through the scope she saw his eyes, cold, knowing. He fired. The bullet struck rock inches from her cheek, shards slicing skin. She flinched, then steadied. She took him next. But the question clawed at her mind even as she fired. How had he known where she was? The fight below raged. Claire picked targets, methodical, every breath a decision. The ground team pushed forward, wounded but moving. The courier's escort lay broken, scattered in the dust. Finally, silence fell heavy. Her body trembled when she stood. Her cheek stung where the rock had cut her. Blood, sweat, dust. She slung the rifle, heart still hammering. In the debrief hours later, voices filled the tent. Praise, relief. Casualties counted, but fewer than expected thanks to Overwatch. They said her name with respect. Yet Claire's mind wasn't in the room. It was still on that ridge, locked in the gaze of the hostile who had found her. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance. Someone had told them where she'd be. She sat in silence, eyes lowered, hands clasped tight. Around her, the others celebrated survival with weary laughter. But inside, suspicion burned. The old woman's words returned like a ghost in her ear. Your footsteps sound like a drum. Someone is listening. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, she felt truly hunted. Why did she hesitate at the door? The briefing room was filled with chatter, low voices, shifting boots, the rustle of maps and files. Yet Claire lingered outside, hand resting on the frame, unable to cross the threshold. She had faced ambushes, stared through scopes at men who wanted her dead, endured nights of silence heavy enough to crush her chest. But this was different. Inside that room sat the very people she might have to accuse. Not today, not yet, but soon. She forced herself to enter, keeping her eyes low. Conversations paused briefly when she appeared, then resumed. She slid into her chair, back straight, face unreadable. The commander spoke, his voice a practiced mix of authority and fatigue. Interception was successful. Documents are being decrypted. Casualties were fewer than expected. Good work. But there's a problem. Claire's stomach tightened. The commander's gaze swept the room. Our position was compromised before the ambush. Someone knew where we'd be. That means someone in this circle talked. Until we find out who, every mission is at risk. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. Claire felt their eyes flicker to each other, to the floor. Suspicion spread like smoke, invisible but choking. She didn't speak, not yet. Later, as soldiers dispersed, she lingered near the edge of the tent. Her fingers brushed the rough canvas wall, her mind racing. She could almost hear the enemy's bullet crack again, stone splintering against her cheek. The look in that hostile's eyes, recognition, it wouldn't leave her. Someone had betrayed her. That night she cleaned her rifle by lantern light, alone in her quarters. Each click of metal echoed too loudly in the cramped space. She should have felt relief, another mission done, another day alive. But all she felt was the weight of unseen eyes. A knock on the door startled her. She froze, hand on the bolt assembly. "Sergeant," a voice, young, nervous, the same private from before. Claire hesitated, then opened the door just enough to see him. His face was pale, drawn. "Can I talk to you?" She let him in. He stood awkwardly, hands twisting at his sides. "I shouldn't be here, I know, but I need to tell someone. I heard two of the guys talking last night. They said your name. Said maybe you were the leak." The words hit like a fist. Claire's chest tightened, but her face stayed calm. "Who?" The private shifted, fear flickering in his eyes. I don't know if I should say, if I'm wrong." "Names," Claire cut him off, voice low but sharp. He swallowed. "Staff Sergeant Keene and Corporal Dyer, they were drunk, whispering, but I heard them." Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. She nodded once. "You did the right thing telling me. Don't repeat this to anyone else." The boy nodded quickly, almost relieved to hand the burden away. When he left, silence returned, heavier than before. Her name on their tongues. So now, not only was she suspecting betrayal, she was the one being branded the betrayer. The irony burned. The following days blurred into tension. Missions continued, but each step felt brittle, fragile. In the mess hall, conversations hushed when she entered. On patrol, she felt eyes on her back. The rhythm of her footsteps, steady, deliberate, felt louder than ever. Once she caught Keene watching her. His expression unreadable, a smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. Another time, Dyer brushed past her in the corridor, muttering just loud enough for her to hear. Not everyone trusts ghosts with rifles. Her fists clenched, but she didn't respond. Not yet. That night she dreamed of her brother again. His voice, half teasing, half earnest. "Don't let them silence you, Claire, not you." She woke with tears on her cheeks, the lantern long burned out. She couldn't shake the old woman's words either. "Your footsteps sound like a drum. Someone is listening." But who and why? The decrypted documents gave a partial answer. Inside were lists, names, supply routes, planned strikes. But one detail stood out. An operation scheduled weeks earlier had failed spectacularly, with the enemy waiting in place before the unit even arrived. The resemblance to her ambush was undeniable. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a pattern. Claire brought it to the commander in private. She laid the files on his desk, pointed to the parallels, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He listened, expression hard, but when she finished, he leaned back. "You're suggesting a mole." "I'm saying it's the only explanation that fits," Claire replied. The commander rubbed his temples. "You realize what that accusation means. It will rip this unit apart. Trust is already thin." Claire met his gaze. Better a unit torn apart than one sent blind into a grave. For a moment silence stretched between them, then he nodded slowly. "I'll look into it, quietly. In the meantime, keep your head down, don't draw attention." Her jaw tightened. Don't draw attention. As if she hadn't spent her entire life being forced into silence, her existence questioned, her presence tolerated but never embraced. And now, when her steps were the only steady beat in the storm, they wanted her quieter still. She left without saluting. Days later, another mission. Escort duty, routine, supposedly. A convoy through a mountain pass. Claire rode shotgun in the lead vehicle, rifle across her lap, eyes scanning ridgelines etched black against the morning sky. The silence was oppressive, too still. No wind, no birds, just engines and breath. Her instincts screamed. Then the blast. The lead vehicle rocked violently, tires shredded by an IED. Smoke and fire billowed. Gunfire erupted from the cliffs above. An ambush. Again. Claire was thrown against the door, ears ringing. She scrambled out, rifle up, scanning. Shadows moved on the ridge. Bullets snapped overhead. She dropped one hostile, then another. But this wasn't random, it was surgical, precise. They had been waiting, positioned perfectly. She dove behind the smoking wreck, heart hammering. Soldiers screamed, returning fire blindly. She caught a glimpse of the private, the boy who had confided in her, crawling for cover, panic etched on his face. Her finger hovered. She lined up the shot, exhaled, fired. The man chasing the private collapsed. But the boy's eyes locked on hers across the chaos. For a heartbeat, she saw something like gratitude, then fear. Fear of her. The firefight raged. Minutes bled into eternity. Finally, air support arrived, scattering the ambushers. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groans of wounded. Claire stood in the smoke, chest heaving. Blood streaked her arm, dust coated her skin. Around her, men whispered, glancing her way. The pattern was undeniable now, twice in weeks, always her position known, always suspicion falling closer to her. She felt it deep in her bones. Someone wanted her silenced. As medics moved among the wounded, Claire walked alone to the edge of the pass. Her boots crunched in the gravel, the sound unnaturally loud. She stared out at the jagged horizon, smoke curling into the pale sky. Her footsteps echoed in her ears, drumbeats. And she realized the truth she hadn't wanted to face. The betrayal wasn't random. It wasn't just a mole. It was personal. Someone wasn't just hunting the unit. They were hunting her. Why did she hear her own name in the radio static? The convoy ambush was over, the wounded evacuated, the reports filed. But the sound lingered, faint, distorted, buried under the crackle of interference. Claire was certain. Her name, whispered, drawn out like a taunt. "Claire." She replayed the recording later, alone in the comms tent. Static hissed, words half-eaten by noise. She turned up the volume, straining. It was faint, but it was there. Not a call sign, not sergeant, her name. Her pulse thudded. The only people who knew her by that name here were inside the unit. And yet, there it was, bleeding through enemy channels. Someone was giving her away, not just her position, her identity. That night she walked the perimeter, rifle slung, boots heavy in the dust. The base was quiet, fires glowing in barrels, guards shifting uneasily at posts. Above, the sky was endless, stars sharp as glass. Her footsteps seemed to echo louder than usual, like the ground itself was repeating them back. She thought again of the old woman in the market. "Your footsteps sound like a drum. Someone is listening." The words no longer felt like superstition. They felt like prophecy. In the mess hall the next day, conversations hushed as she entered. Trays clattered too loudly. Eyes lingered too long. She sat alone, eating methodically, every bite like gravel in her mouth. Keen and Dyer were at a nearby table, laughing too hard, their voices cutting across the room. She caught fragments. Ghost with a scope, cursed, not one of us. Her jaw tightened. She kept her gaze on her tray. The private, the boy who had confided in her, slipped into the seat across from her. His hands shook as he unfolded his napkin, trying to look casual. "You hear them, don't you?" he whispered. Claire didn't look up. "I hear enough. They're saying you bring death, that you're marked." His voice cracked. "Some of them think maybe you're the reason these ambushes keep happening." Her throat burned, but she swallowed it down. "And you, what do you think?" The boy's eyes darted around, then back to her. He hesitated. Finally, he whispered, "I think you saved me twice. That's enough." It was a small thing, but it was something, a thread of belief in a sea of suspicion. Still, Claire knew belief wouldn't save her. Proof would. 2 nights later, she got it. The commander had tasked her with perimeter overwatch. Routine, boring, the kind of duty they gave to those they half-trusted. She lay prone on a ridge above the camp, night vision goggles painting the world in green ghosts. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant bark of a fox, the hum of generators below. Then movement. A figure slipping out of camp, silent, quick, not on patrol, not sanctioned. Claire's pulse quickened. She adjusted her scope, tracking. The figure moved toward the outer edge, stopping by a comms relay, hands busy, planting something. Her chest tightened, a transmitter. She raised her rifle, breath steady. She could end it. One squeeze, one less traitor. But then the figure turned, and the green glow revealed the face. Her stomach dropped. It was someone she knew. Not Keen, not Dyer. The private, the boy. The same boy who had come to her, whispered his trust, told her she saved him. Claire froze, finger on the trigger. Her breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed to fire, but her chest burned with disbelief. Why him? Why betray? Why her? The boy finished with the device, glanced around nervously, then slipped back toward camp. Claire lowered her rifle slowly, shaking. Her mind spun. Had he played her from the start, or was he being used, threatened? The next morning she confronted him, not with accusation, not directly. She found him by the water tanks filling his canteen. His hands trembled when he saw her. "You believe me, don't you?" he asked softly, almost pleading. Claire studied him. His eyes were wide, tired, rimmed with sleeplessness. Too young to carry secrets like this. "What do you want me to believe?" she asked. He looked down, water spilling over his fingers. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, barely audible, "I didn't have a choice." Her chest ached. She wanted to grab him, shake the truth out, demand answers. But his voice cracked on that one sentence, and she knew. He was caught in something bigger. Someone had their claws in him. And through him, they had her. That night, Claire dismantled her rifle slowly, piece by piece, the way her brother once taught her at the kitchen table. She remembered his laughter, the way he teased her for cleaning each part twice, the pride in his eyes when she outshot him for the first time. Now, as she oiled the barrel, she whispered into the silence, "I'm still listening, Michael. I won't stop." The comms crackled faintly in the distance. Somewhere, someone was sending her name again. She set the rifle down, stared into the lantern flame. If they thought she would break, they were wrong. If they thought footsteps could be silenced, they didn't understand. Her footsteps weren't just hers anymore. They were her brother. They were every name lost to betrayal, every ghost left unburied. She would find out who was listening, and she would make sure they heard the last echo. Why did the commander call her in alone? It was unusual. Briefings were always group affairs, strategy laid out like a map, orders handed down in neat stacks. But this time it was just Claire. The tent was dim, lanterns casting shadows that seemed too long, too sharp. The commander sat behind his desk, papers scattered, his face drawn with fatigue. "Close the flap," he said quietly. She obeyed, the sound of canvas dropping shutting out the world. Silence pressed in. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes fixed on her. "Sergeant, I need you to be honest with me. Do you believe there's a mole in this unit?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." "And do you believe it's you?" The question struck like a blow. Her jaw locked, she held his gaze. "No." The commander exhaled, rubbing his face. "Half the men think it is. You've been at every ambush. Your name somehow is on enemy channels. I've tried to shield you, but suspicion spreads faster than truth." Claire's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Then let me prove it." His eyes narrowed. "How?" She hesitated. She couldn't tell him about the private, not yet. If she exposed him now, she'd never learn who held the strings. "Give me access to the decrypted files, all of them. I'll find the pattern." The commander studied her, then nodded slowly. "You have 48 hours." When she left the tent, whispers followed her. She ignored them, footsteps deliberate, steady, drumbeats. That night, under the thin light of a lantern, she pored over the files. Names blurred, numbers tangled, routes traced like veins across maps. Her eyes burned, but she forced herself to continue. And then she saw it. Buried in the logistics reports, a supply shipment logged twice, once under official channels, once rerouted. The signature on the reroute was coded, but she recognized the pattern. A hand that signed in haste, always leaning letters left. Her breath caught. It wasn't the private. It wasn't Keen or Dyer. It was higher. Staff, someone trusted enough to move supplies unnoticed. Someone who had access to everything. She leaned back, chest tight, lantern flickering. If she was right, then the betrayal wasn't a soldier desperate or drunk. It was systemic, protected. Which meant confronting it would be like aiming at a target, shielded by walls of steel. The next day, the private found her again. He was pale, restless, eyes darting like a hunted animal. "They know," he whispered, gripping her arm. "They know I told you." Claire pulled him into the shadow of a tent. "Who knows?" "Them, the ones making me do this." His breath came quick, shallow. "They'll kill me, Sergeant, please." Her chest ached. He was just a boy, a pawn, and now he was crumbling. "Tell me who," she urged. "Who's pulling the strings?" But before he could answer, Keen's voice cut through the air. "Hey, Private, get over here." The boy flinched, eyes wide, then shook his head. "I can't, not now." He pulled free and rushed toward the sound, leaving Claire in the shadows, fists trembling. That night she dreamt of her brother again. Not the playful version, not the one who teased her about cleaning rifles twice. This time he was silent. Standing at the edge of a field, his uniform stained, his eyes empty. She called to him, but he only turned away, his footsteps fading until all she heard was the echo. She woke with tears on her pillow and a cold certainty in her chest. The betrayal had roots deeper than she imagined. And if she didn't act soon, she wouldn't just lose the unit's trust, she'd lose herself. The next mission was reconnaissance, simple on paper, but Claire knew better. She moved with the squad through the valley, every sound amplified, boots on gravel, breath in masks, the faint hum of radios. Shadows shifted against cliffs. Her eyes scanned constantly, rifle ready. Then the static. Her name again, faint, distorted, Claire. She froze, heart pounding. No one else reacted, they hadn't heard it. And then, as if on cue, gunfire erupted from the ridge. Another ambush. Chaos exploded. Bullets cracked, dirt erupted, men shouted. Claire dove to cover, returning fire with precision. One shot, two, three, hostiles dropped, but more pressed in. The squad scrambled, fear edging their voices. And then she heard Keen yelling over the chaos. "It's her. They're tracking her. She's leading them to us." The words cut through like a blade. Even as she fought, even as her shots saved lives, the accusation spread. She saw it in their eyes, suspicion, fear, doubt. Her stomach twisted. The private crawled toward her, face smeared with dirt, eyes desperate. "It's not you," he gasped. "I swear it's not you, but they'll never believe it." She gritted her teeth, pulling him behind cover as bullets tore the ground nearby. "Then tell me who it is." Tears streaked his face, mixing with grime. "I can't. If I do, they'll kill my family." Her breath caught. Family. That was the chain binding him, not fear for himself, but for those waiting at home. The firefight raged. Minutes stretched into eternity. Finally, air support thundered overhead, scattering the ambushers. Silence fell heavy again. The squad regrouped, battered, bloody, eyes dark. Keen's glare burned into her as he spat. "She's cursed. Every step she takes brings death." No one defended her. Not even the commander. Claire stood apart, rifle heavy in her hands, chest heaving. Her footsteps echoed in the valley as she walked away, each one louder in her ears. Drumbeats. Not just of suspicion, but of war. She knew now, the betrayal wasn't just in whispers. It was institutional, buried deep, clawing through every mission, every man. And she knew something else. The next ambush wouldn't just be another trap. It would be the end, unless she turned the echo of her footsteps into something they could no longer ignore. The night had grown heavy, almost unnaturally still. Even the desert wind, usually restless and cutting, had gone silent, as if it too was waiting for the end. Emma adjusted her stance, her boots pressing into the earth, each step resonating inside her chest like the slow beat of a war drum. She looked out over the quiet horizon, where the city lights flickered faintly in the far distance. Behind her, the base was settling into its nightly rhythm. Soldiers smoked in silence, engines cooled, and the low hum of generators filled the void where voices dared not intrude. It felt like the pause after a long song, when the last note still lingers in the air. Emma exhaled, her breath misting faintly in the cold air. She had survived. Against statistics, against probability, against every whisper that told her she couldn't, she had returned. But what remained inside her? That was the question no after-action report could answer. "Price?" A voice broke the quiet. Captain Ramirez approached, his shadow stretching across the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, studying her as if weighing whether to speak further. "Command wants your debrief first thing in the morning." Emma nodded. Her throat tightened, but she found her voice. "And after that?" Ramirez hesitated. Then he did something rare. He removed his cap and looked her straight in the eyes, no ranks between them. "After that, it's whatever you decide. You've carried more than most." His tone was low, almost reverent. "The choice is yours now." She gave the faintest smile. A choice. The one thing war had stolen from her over and over again, choice. When Ramirez left, she remained alone. The stars above burned sharp, indifferent and eternal. She thought of those who hadn't returned, whose footsteps would never again drum the earth. Their silence was heavier than any weight she had ever carried. Emma lowered herself to the ground, tracing the dirt with her fingertips. She remembered the first day she'd stepped into training, the laughter that dismissed her, the voices that doubted her. She remembered the long nights when fear pressed against her ribs, when she had to pretend strength while breaking quietly inside. Her eyes stung, not from weakness, but from the memory of holding it all too long. She whispered almost to the earth itself, "You're not forgotten." The words trembled, then steadied. Footsteps approached from behind, light, hesitant. It was the young private from earlier, the one who had asked her how she kept going. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, his hands shaking slightly. "Thought you might need one," he said, offering it to her like a peace treaty. Emma accepted. The coffee was lukewarm, but it warmed her hands. For a long while neither spoke. They just sat in the hush of the night, staring out at the horizon where battles had been fought, where echoes still lived. Finally, the private asked softly, "Do you think it was worth it, all of it?" Emma didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. She sipped the bitter coffee, letting the weight of the question settle. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, steady, like the drumbeat of her steps. Worth doesn't always look the way we hope. Sometimes it's not about victories or medals or even survival. Sometimes it's about standing when no one else will. Sometimes it's about carrying the silence for those who can't. The private's eyes glistened. He nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Not yet. One day, maybe. Emma finished the coffee, set the mug down, and stood. Her body ached, but there was a strange lightness too. She turned toward the barracks, her shadow stretching ahead of her. Each step she took was slow, deliberate. But in the quiet of that night, they sounded louder than gunfire. Footsteps that were not just her own, but those of every voice silenced, every sacrifice unseen. And as she walked, it was as if the ground remembered, as if the earth itself carried the rhythm onward. Her footsteps became drumbeats, not of war, not of violence, but of memory, and history would echo them long after her name was gone. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.